The first thing I noticed wasn't the laughter, it was the way my wife didn't look at me. She was standing under the warm lights of the penthouse living room, a crystal glass balanced perfectly in her hand, smiling like she owned the air itself. Everyone leaned toward her, men in tailored jackets, women with polished smiles and sharp eyes. And I was already there, already invisible, before a single word was spoken about me. That's when I realized something was wrong. Not later, not after, right then. Before we go any further, if you've ever felt overlooked, dismissed, or quietly humiliated by someone who was supposed to have your back, hit subscribe, tap like, and leave a comment. These stories aren't just entertainment. They're mirrors. My name is Daniel Harper. I'm not loud. I'm not flashy. I don't dominate rooms. I built my life the slow way: consistency, loyalty, patience. For 22 years, I believed that counted for something. That night was supposed to be a celebration. My wife, Lauren, had just been promoted. Big title, bigger money. The kind of promotion that changes how people say your name. She worked in consulting, surrounded by confidence and competition, and tonight she wanted everyone to see how far she'd climbed. The apartment wasn't ours. It belonged to a man named Richard Coleman, one of her senior partners. Floor-to-ceiling windows, city lights like scattered gold. The kind of place that reminds you exactly where you stand. Lauren floated from group to group, laughing at the right moments, touching arms lightly, making people feel seen. I stood near the bar, sipping a drink that tasted more expensive than it was, watching her perform a version of herself I barely recognized anymore. People asked what I did. I told them. Nothing impressive. A few nods. Conversations drifted away. I didn't mind. Or at least, I told myself I didn't. Then came the introductions. Someone, his name was Jason Miller, I think, clinked his glass and said, "Lauren, you never told us how lucky your husband must be." Lucky, Lauren paused. Just a second too long. Long enough for silence to stretch. Long enough for eyes to shift toward me like I was an object being evaluated. She smiled. Not warmly. Not cruelly either. Something in between. "This is, well," she said, tilting her head slightly. "Just my husband, Daniel." Just. The word didn't hit me like a punch. It slid in quietly. Settled. Heavy. Laughter followed. Soft at first. Then bolder. Someone near the couch said, "Hey, lucky guy." Like it was a joke we were all in on. I raised my glass slightly. A reflex. Polite. Controlled. Lauren had already turned away, and no one noticed my face. No one asked how that landed. And that was the point. The rest of the night moved strangely after that. Conversations overlapped. Music hummed low. I caught fragments. Talk about deals, about power, about who mattered and who didn't. A man named Trevor Hayes, one of Lauren's colleagues, grew louder as the drinks flowed. Too comfortable. Too confident. He joked about backup plans and safe choices, grinning like he was clever. People laughed. Lauren smiled again. That same smile. She never once looked back at me. I didn't interrupt. I didn't correct anyone. I didn't make a scene. I stayed exactly where I was, holding everything together with silence. And in that silence, something inside me finally stopped pretending. Not anger. Not rage. Clarity. Because when someone reduces you in public, they're not joking. They're declaring something. And once it's declared, it can't be unheard. I took another sip. Set the glass down carefully. I remember thinking how quiet I felt. How calm. The night wasn't over, but whatever this was, it had already begun. After that introduction, something shifted, not in the room, but inside me. The noise continued. Glasses clinked. Music breathed softly through hidden speakers, yet everything felt oddly distant, like I was watching the evening through thick glass. I stayed where I was, near the bar, not out of pride or defiance, but because moving suddenly felt unnecessary. When you realize you've already been placed exactly where others think you belong, motion becomes optional. Lauren didn't come back to me. She didn't glance over, didn't check my face, didn't do any of the small things she used to do without thinking. Years ago, she would have reached for my hand, even absent-mindedly. Now her hands were busy gesturing, emphasizing points, drawing laughter. I watched her tell a story I'd heard before, about a crisis project overseas. But this time, she edited me out of it entirely. I had been there. I had helped her rehearse those late-night calls, paced the living room while she practiced her arguments. Tonight, the story belonged only to her. People rotated in and out of my orbit. A woman named Susan Blake asked how long we'd been married. When I told her, she raised her eyebrows slightly, like she was impressed by endurance rather than affection. "That's rare," she said, "especially in her world." She meant Lauren's world, not ours. Trevor Hayes drifted closer as the night wore on. He had the loose posture of someone who'd never been told no in a room like this. He spoke loudly, comfortably, like the space belonged to him by default. His jokes weren't sharp enough to be openly offensive, but they leaned in a direction that didn't need explaining. "Some people are built for stability," he said at one point, swirling his drink. "Others are built for ambition." He smiled toward Lauren. She laughed, not nervously, easily. I noticed then how often people spoke around me instead of to me, as if I were part of the furniture, present, useful, silent. No one asked what I thought about anything. And why would they? I'd already been defined and I excused myself to the balcony, needing air, though I wasn't short of breath. The city stretched endlessly below, lights blinking like signals I didn't know how to read anymore. I rested my hands on the railing and stood still. There was no dramatic internal monologue, no sudden urge to confront anyone. Just a slow, uncomfortable inventory of moments I'd ignored over the years. The canceled dinners, the distracted nods, the way we had quietly become I in her vocabulary. Behind me, the sliding door opened. Lauren stepped out, phone in hand, still smiling from whatever conversation she'd left. "You okay?" she asked, casually, like checking the weather. "I'm fine," I said. And I was, at least, in the way you are right before you admit something you've avoided for a long time. She nodded, already half turned back toward the party. "Good," she said. "These things matter." I wanted to ask what she meant by things. The party? The people? The version of herself she was presenting? But the moment passed. She went back inside without waiting for an answer. When I returned a few minutes later, the energy had shifted again. Louder now. Bolder. Trevor was in the middle of another story, one hand resting too comfortably on the back of Lauren's chair. He joked about safe bets and exciting risks, and the group laughed like they understood exactly what he meant. I caught Lauren's eye for a fraction of a second. She didn't look away. She didn't stop him. That was when I realized something important. This wasn't about alcohol or misjudged humor. This wasn't someone crossing a line accidentally. This was a room full of people responding to the signals they'd been given. And Lauren had given them permission that I didn't feel embarrassed anymore. That part had already burned out. What replaced it was quieter, heavier, and far more dangerous. The certainty that silence, too, is a choice. And every choice leaves a mark. That I picked up my glass again, not to drink, but to feel its weight. Somewhere behind the laughter and the music, the night continued unfolding, unaware that for me, it had already changed shape entirely. By the time the room reached that careless volume where people stop listening and start performing, I understood something else. No one was drunk enough to be confused. Every laugh landed where it was intended. Every pause was calculated. Every glance had meaning. That realization settled into me with a strange calm, like acceptance without forgiveness. That I moved through the room slowly, not weaving, not rushing, just observing. A man named Michael Reeves talked about leverage like it was a personality trait. Another, Brian Thompson, complained about his second home as if it were a burden. Their words floated past me, unanchored, empty. I nodded when required, smiled when expected. Years of practice had made that easy. Lauren sat on the edge of the sectional now, legs crossed, posture open, relaxed in a way she rarely was at home. Trevor stood close again, leaning in when he spoke, lowering his voice just enough to feel private. I didn't hear the words, but I didn't need to. I recognized the rhythm. The familiarity of it hurt more than any single sentence could have. Someone handed me another drink. I thanked them and set it down untouched. I wanted my head clear. Clarity felt important, though I couldn't have said why yet. Richard Coleman clinked his glass again and called for attention, announcing a toast to Lauren's future. Applause filled the room. She stood, radiant, confident, every inch the woman they admired. She said the right things: gratitude, teamwork, opportunity. She didn't mention support. She didn't mention sacrifice. She didn't mention me. As the applause faded, Trevor added something under his breath that made the people nearest him laugh again. I saw Lauren smile without hesitation. That smile landed somewhere deep and unfamiliar inside me, like a door closing that I walked toward the kitchen island, where my phone rested face down beside a bowl of olives no one was eating. I picked it up, not urgently, not dramatically, just deliberately. The screen lit up. No new messages. No missed calls. Only the quiet confirmation that everything I needed was already there. I remembered the moment that message had been sent. Not the exact date, but the feeling. Late evening. Lauren in another city. Her voice tired, unguarded. Honest in a way people only are when they think they're safe from consequences. I hadn't asked questions then. I hadn't needed to. I'd simply listened. Behind me, laughter spiked again. Trevor's voice rose above the rest, joking about real partners and comfortable arrangements. Someone nudged Lauren playfully. "You know what he means," they said. She laughed, shaking her head like it was all harmless. Like words didn't matter. That was when I felt it, the shift from observation to decision. Not sudden, not explosive, just inevitable. I turned and met Lauren's eyes again. This time, she held my gaze. For a second, something flickered there. Recognition, maybe, or annoyance. It was gone before I could name it. "Daniel," she said, approaching me, her tone light but edged. "You've been quiet." "I'm listening," I replied. She smiled tightly. "Don't take things so seriously." I nodded. "I think tonight calls for honesty." She frowned slightly, confused. "What do you mean?" Before I could answer, Trevor chimed in, lifting his glass toward me. "Hey, no hard feelings, man," he said, grinning. "Everyone plays a role." The people around us chuckled, expecting me to join in, to deflect, to disappear again. Instead, I stepped forward, raising my own glass. Not high, just enough to signal intention. The room noticed. Conversations tapered off, curiosity replacing amusement. Silence gathered, uncertain. "Since we're all being so open tonight," I said calmly, surprised by how steady my voice sounded, "maybe we should be completely honest." Lauren's smile faltered. "Daniel," she whispered, warning now that I didn't look at her. I reached for the speaker near the window, the one someone had connected earlier for music. My phone felt heavier than before, not with guilt, but with finality, and no one spoke. No one laughed. I tapped the screen once, and for the first time that night, the room was truly quiet. The sound that came from the speaker wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was Lauren's voice, clear, familiar, unmistakable. Not dramatic, not emotional, calm in a way that suggested certainty. The kind of certainty that doesn't look around to see who's listening. "He's safe," her voice said. A brief pause, like she was choosing the right word. "You're the one I actually want." No background noise, no laughter, just that sentence, suspended in the air like it had weight. I didn't watch the room at first. I watched her. Lauren didn't gasp. She didn't shout. Her face didn't collapse into panic the way people expect in moments like this. Instead, all the color drained from her expression, leaving something raw and unguarded behind. Her mouth opened slightly, then closed. For a fraction of a second, she looked smaller. Human. Someone near the couch shifted uncomfortably. A glass clinked as a hand trembled. Trevor's grin vanished so quickly it was almost impressive. He took a step back, like distance could rewrite what had just been heard. I reached out and turned the speaker off. One sentence had been enough. I hadn't come to perform. I hadn't come to explain. The silence afterward was different from before. It wasn't awkward. It was heavy, dense. The kind of silence that forces people to notice their own breathing. Richard Coleman cleared his throat. I think, he said slowly, we might call it a night. No one argued. Chairs scraped softly against the floor. People avoided eye contact as they gathered coats and purses. A woman I barely knew, Karen Wilson, I think, paused in front of me. I'm sorry, she said quietly. I nodded, accepting it without ceremony. Trevor didn't say anything. He couldn't look at me, or at Lauren. He stood frozen for a moment, then grabbed his jacket and left without a word. His confidence evaporated like it had never existed. Lauren finally found her voice. Why would you do this to me? She whispered, not to the room, but to me. There was no anger in it, just disbelief. That I turned to face her fully then. Really face her. Not the version on display tonight, but the woman I'd shared a life with. You did it first, I said evenly. I just stopped pretending. Her eyes filled, not with tears yet, but with something close. Regret, maybe, or fear. She looked around at the emptying room, the scattered evidence of a night that had unraveled faster than she could manage. You didn't have to do it like that, she said. That I considered that. You didn't have to say it like that either. The last guests left quietly. The music never came back on. The city lights outside blinked indifferently, unchanged by any of it. I picked up my coat from the back of the chair, moving slowly, deliberately. There was no rush anymore. Lauren stood very still, arms wrapped around herself, like she was trying to hold something together. What happens now? She asked. I don't know, I said honestly. And for the first time in a long while, that didn't scare me. I walked toward the door, then paused, my hand on the handle. One more thing, I said without turning around. Tonight wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. You brought it into the room. I just didn't protect it anymore. She didn't reply. I stepped into the hallway, the door closing softly behind me. The sounds of the party were gone, replaced by quiet, by space. The elevator doors opened, and as I stepped inside, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall. I looked older than I had that morning. But I also looked clearer. For the first time that night, I felt something like balance return. The elevator ride down felt longer than it should have, not because I was anxious, but because my body was finally catching up to what my mind had already accepted. Each floor passed in silence, the soft hum of cables the only sound. I loosened my grip on my coat and let my shoulders drop. I hadn't realized how tense I'd been until there was no one left to perform for. Outside, the night air was cool and honest. No filtered light. No applause, just the city doing what it always does, moving forward without asking permission. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, unsure whether to call a car or simply walk. I chose to walk. I needed the time. As I moved through the streets, fragments of the evening replayed. Not the message, not the silence afterward, but the smaller things. The pause before Lauren introduced me. The laughter that followed. The way people looked at me once they thought I knew my place. I realized then how long I'd been carrying that weight, telling myself it was normal, that this was just how successful lives worked. Tonight stripped that illusion clean. My phone buzzed once in my pocket. I didn't check it. Whatever it was could wait. For the first time in years, I wasn't responsible for managing someone else's comfort. I stopped at a small diner I'd passed 100 times and never entered. Vinyl booths. Late night quiet. I ordered coffee and sat alone, watching steam rise from the mug. The waitress, a man named Paul with tired eyes and a kind voice, didn't ask questions. He just refilled my cup when it was empty. There was something grounding about that simplicity. I thought about marriage, not as a contract, but as a witness. Someone who sees you when no one else is looking. Somewhere along the way, Lauren had stopped seeing me. Or maybe she had, and simply decided it wasn't enough. Either way, I understood now that staying silent had never been loyalty. It had been self-erasure. When I finally checked my phone, there were messages, missed calls, explanations forming in text bubbles that I didn't open. I wasn't ready to read words that would only circle what had already been said out loud, that I paid the bill and stepped back into the street. Dawn was still hours away, but the city felt lighter somehow. Honest again. Over the following days, the noise from that night traveled faster than I expected. A few people reached out. Some apologized awkwardly. Others didn't mention the party at all, as if ignoring it might rewrite history. Lauren sent messages too, long ones, short ones, angry ones, quiet ones. I read them eventually, just not right away. What surprised me most wasn't the fallout. It was the calm, the absence of the constant low-level tension I'd lived with for years. I slept better. I spoke more slowly. I stopped explaining myself to people who weren't listening. One afternoon, as I sat alone in my living room, sunlight cutting across the floor, I realized something important. Dignity doesn't announce itself. It shows up the moment you stop negotiating your worth. That night at the party didn't end my life. It clarified it. If you're listening to this and you've ever been reduced to a role you didn't choose, if you've ever been labeled safe when you were giving everything, understand this. Silence protects the lie. Truth doesn't need volume. It just needs space. And if this story resonated with you, if it stirred something you recognize, make sure you subscribe, hit like, and leave a comment. These conversations matter. Your voice matters. And sometimes, the moment you stop pretending is the moment everything finally begins.